He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of never having truly lived. There was no tragedy in the grave, only truth. The kind that doesn't scream at you, but stares silently from cold marble. A name, a date, and a dash. That dash, that tiny line carved between two numbers, contains everything that ever was. Every decision, every regret, every moment wasted in the illusion that time was infinite. But time doesn't announce its theft. It takes quietly, while you scroll, while you delay, while you wait to feel ready. And when you finally realize how short life is, it's already been spent, traded away second by second, for comfort, convenience, and distraction. We've built a world that moves faster than the human soul can travel, a world of blinking lights and artificial urgency. But the things that matter, the things that shape a legacy, have never changed. They still demand silence, discipline, sacrifice, belief. Napoleon Hill knew this long before science caught up to it. He understood that most people fail not for lack of potential, but because they drift. Not because of a single catastrophic mistake, but because of 1,000 tiny compromises. They postpone their dreams by inches. They surrender their destiny by degrees. Until one day they look back and wonder how they ended up so far from the life they once imagined. And the answer is always the same. They waited. Waited for the perfect time. Waited to feel inspired. Waited for permission. But history remembers no one who waited. It remembers those who moved, even when they were afraid. Thomas Edison didn't wait until he was certain. He failed thousands of times before the light appeared. Not because he had a guarantee, but because he believed in a world that didn't exist yet. That's the truth of all creation. It begins in the unseen. Tricky, most people want proof before they act. But the great ones act, and then the proof appears. Belief, Hill taught, must come before evidence. You don't become confident and then take action. You take action again and again until confidence becomes inevitable. But to do that, you must override your biology because human nature resists risk. The mind shaped by generations of survival whispers, stay safe, stay still, don't make a mistake. But in that whisper lives the death of all potential. That's the first real enemy. Not fear itself, but the logic of fear. The way it disguises itself as caution, as wisdom, as responsibility. But what it really is regret, disguised as reason. You see it everywhere. In the man who talks about writing a book but never opens a blank page. In the woman who dreams of starting a business but tells herself she's not ready yet. In the countless souls who live with the ache of unlived potential, but numb it with routine. And yet, the truth remains. No one was ever ready. Not Helen Keller facing a world without sound or sight. Not Churchill during the darkest hours of war. They acted before ready. They moved through the fog. And in doing so, they became the light. Turing, because clarity does not precede movement. Clarity follows commitment. Discipline is not about willpower. It is about identity. A man becomes who he is by what he tolerates, by what he repeats. Most people confuse desire with action. They think wanting something is enough. But the world does not reward desire. It rewards direction. It rewards the man who moves with clarity, not the one who waits for motivation. And clarity, as Napoleon Hill observed, is not a gift. It is a consequence. It comes after the decision, not before. The mistake most people make is believing they must feel aligned before they act. But feelings are fleeting. They change with the weather, the mood, the moment. If your life is ruled by your emotions, then your future is at the mercy of your most undisciplined days. Hill studied hundreds of successful men, and they shared one trait, not brilliance, not charm, not luck, but the ability to act in defiance of their feelings, to do what needed to be done even when their minds screamed for comfort. That's not natural, that's training. The discipline is not a restriction, it is a rebellion against mediocrity. It is a decision to become dangerous to the forces that want you distracted, addicted, and numb. And yes, it is uncomfortable, but so is regret. Kakuri. The ancient Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius, ruling the largest empire in the world, still reminded himself daily that ease is the enemy, that without discomfort, the mind rots. He wrote to himself not to inspire others, but to stay awake, because he knew the greatest battle was not on the battlefield, but within his own perception. Today, that battle continues, but now the enemies are invisible. Comfort, distraction, convenience. They don't knock down your door, they lull you to sleep. So, that's why you must build systems stronger than your moods. Rituals that survive the chaos. Morning routines that happen even when the mind protests. Commitments that are kept even when the world isn't watching. This is not about hustle. It is about sovereignty, about refusing to be a slave to your impulses. D'accord? Because every time you act in alignment with your future self, you're casting a vote for the identity you are building. And over time, those votes become who you are. Not most people underestimate the cost of inconsistency. They start, stop, start again. They let emotion override commitment, and every time they do, their self-trust erodes a little more, until one day they no longer believe in their own promises. But those who become unstoppable, those who endure, understand that trust in the self is not built through inspiration. It is built through execution, through days when it's inconvenient, through moments when no one claps. They don't need motivation. They've become the kind of person who acts anyway. It's not glamorous, it's not exciting, but it is powerful. Because in a world where most people are led by how they feel, the man who chooses to lead himself becomes rare, and what is rare becomes valuable. Kirkeen, the market rewards those who do the hard thing. Life opens for those who stop negotiating with their weakness. And so, you must ask, not what do I want, but what am I willing to suffer for? Because that is the real measure of destiny. The world is addicted to speed, fast food, fast answers, fast success. But the things that matter, the things that last, are built in time, not in haste. Greatness has a delay baked into its design. It filters out the uncommitted. It rewards only those who endure the silence. Delayed gratification is not suffering for its own sake. It is the art of alignment, of choosing long-term vision over short-term validation. It is what separates the man who fantasizes from the man who finishes. Thus, Napoleon Hill saw this play out in the most powerful lives he studied. None of them succeeded quickly. None of them received applause in the early days. In fact, many of them were mocked, doubted, ignored. But they kept planting seeds when others were looking for shortcuts. And in that silence, they became someone the world couldn't ignore. Consider the story of a man named Howard Schultz. Before Starbucks became a global name, he was rejected by over 200 investors. People thought the idea of selling premium coffee in America was absurd, but Schultz didn't need the world to believe. He believed enough for all of them, not because he had guarantees, but because he had vision, and that vision became his compass in the dark. Because here's the truth, belief is the seed of all transformation, but most people reverse the order. They want results before they commit. They want proof before they decide. But belief doesn't wait for evidence, it creates it. Every time you show up without validation, you reinforce your belief. Every time you act without applause, you declare your identity. And over time, the world adjusts. Not because it's kind, but because it has no choice but to respect consistency. This is how true confidence is built. Not by being told you're special, but by doing difficult things consistently, by becoming someone you can count on. But this path is not easy. It's full of unknowns. It's full of failure. And failure, too, is a test, a mirror. It asks you one thing. Are you still committed, even now? Most people aren't. They quit at the first sign of resistance. But those who persist understand what Hill meant when he said, every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. Pain is not the end. It is the beginning of refinement. In ancient Japan, swordsmiths would fold steel over and over again, thousands of times until it became nearly unbreakable. It was the folding, the pressure, the fire that made the weapon strong. And so it is with men. The ones who emerge unshakable are not the ones who avoided the fire. They are the ones who stayed inside it long enough to be shaped. Because growth is violent. It kills comfort. It shatters illusions. It dismantles the version of you that is no longer compatible with your calling. And that's why so many resist it. Not because they don't want to grow, but because they don't want to die. Not physically, but psychologically. The death of old habits, old identities, old excuses. But what they don't realize is that the longer they delay this inner death, the longer they delay their true life. Belief is not just a feeling, it is a creative rebellion. The great ones, the Edisons, the Mandelas, the Jobses of history, believed long before there was evidence. They acted on invisible conviction, while others waited for proof. That is what makes belief powerful. It moves before the world is ready. It reshapes perception. It reprograms the nervous system. It filters the world through a lens of possibility, while others choke on limitations. And that lens is not passive. It alters behavior. A man who believes he is destined to build something extraordinary begins to act like it. His posture changes. His habits shift. His vocabulary sharpens. The world over time begins to bend to that conviction, not because of magic, but because of psychological law. Napoleon Hill wrote, "What the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve." That's not poetry. That's neuroscience in action. Because belief changes how you process data, how you interpret obstacles, how you choose your next move. It makes the impossible tolerable and the tolerable actionable. But belief is fragile if you don't protect it. That's why your environment matters more than most people ever realize. You are not just what you think. You are also what you allow. The people you spend time with, the information you consume, the culture you absorb. All of it becomes either scaffolding for your belief or acid that eats through it. Thus, you cannot build an iron mind in a rusted environment. Even the strongest convictions can corrode when surrounded by doubt, cynicism, and casual conversation. That's why every man who has ever reshaped the world first had to separate from it, not in arrogance, but in intention. They built fortresses for their belief. They surrounded themselves with people and ideas that nourished it, not questioned it. Because belief is a fire, and fires go out when ignored. That's why belief must be paired with action. Action is how belief breathes, how it feeds itself, how it becomes stronger. You don't wait until you're certain. You move, you build, you launch. And in doing so, you show your mind that belief is not theoretical, it's operational. This is the paradox. Belief must come before results, but results are how belief grows. So the bridge between the two is discipline, the decision to act before it makes sense, the repetition of behavior long enough that doubt gets tired of fighting you. Chonan, think of Florence Nightingale. She believed in a revolution in healthcare, but she didn't have the systems, the funding, the infrastructure. What she had was a vision of a cleaner, more humane form of care. And she acted. She cleaned blood-stained barracks. She trained nurses. She organized what governments had failed to. Not because she had permission, but because she had belief in motion. And over time, her belief reshaped an entire system. So the question isn't, do you believe in yourself? The question is, do you believe in yourself enough to act before you're ready? Enough to withstand the silence? Enough to protect your vision from a world that wants to dull it? Because belief without action is fantasy, but belief with disciplined action is force, and force repeated with integrity becomes destiny. The man who succeeds isn't always the fastest. Sometimes he's the one who waits the longest without breaking. Because results never arrive on your timeline. Growth has its own seasons. You build the altar before the fire appears, and some days it never does. Still you build. You show up day after day, and some days, nothing happens. No applause, no milestone, no visible change. And yet, you keep going. This is where most give up. not because they're weak, but because they were trained to expect immediacy. They were told that life is a vending machine. Insert effort, receive reward. But life is not transactional, it is transformational. And transformation demands time. The seed doesn't sprout when you scream at the soil. It sprouts when it's ready, because you had the patience to keep watering in silence. Napoleon Hill knew that most men abandon their dreams not because they failed, but because they mistook silence for failure. They quit in the space between effort and outcome. But that space, that desert, has always been the filter. It separates the interested from the committed, the dabblers from the destined. Look at any legacy worth studying. You will find years of obscurity, Beethoven composing in silence, long before a single note became immortal. Nelson Mandela enduring decades in a prison cell, shaping his inner world to one day unite a fractured nation. J.K. Rowling, writing in cafes with a baby on her lap, rejected over and over, until the world caught up to her vision. None of them were waiting for luck. They were becoming something. Unshorinam. That's what most people miss. You don't wait for life to change. You change in such a way that life must respond. You stop wishing for momentum. You become momentum. It's not easy, but it's honest. Once you commit to your future self, there's no returning, no rewinding, only rising. You've seen too much. You've burned the bridge to your old life. And on the other side of that burn, you become someone no longer negotiable. That is how destiny is written, not in bursts of inspiration, but in the brutal consistency of action without reward, in the repetition of excellence when no one sees it, in the decision to keep building while others are still brainstorming. Eventually, something shifts, not in the world, but in you. You stop chasing potential. You start embodying it. You stop waiting for a better environment. You become the environment. You stop asking for signs. You become the signal. And when that shift happens, life bends. Not because you forced it, but because you finally aligned with its laws. The laws Hill spent his life articulating. The laws every awakened soul has touched. That belief drives action, that discipline shapes identity, and that time only honors those who honor it. Chanawan. So no. Life is not short if you live it on purpose. It is only short if you waste it drifting, doubting, delaying. The great tragedy is not death. It is arriving there having never truly lived. But the great triumph is when you decide. Decide that today is not disposable, that your time is not up for auction, that your mind is your most sacred space, and it will be ruled not by emotion, but by intention. Must decide to write your legacy, not with grand moments, but with small, precise acts of daily courage. Because life doesn't respond to your hope. It responds to your discipline. And the world does not need more dreamers. It needs more deciders. So decide. Decide to start. Decide to act. Start now. Don't wait to become the person you admire. Live in such a way that one day someone looks at your life and says, "That was a man who didn't waste it."